In our last installment in this series, we took a drive down memory lane reviewing the early beginnings of Star Wars gaming. In today's video, we're continuing our exploration of video game history to the 2000s, to what many would consider the golden age of Star Wars gaming, and with good reason. This era of games contains some of the most beloved titles in Star Wars history, with fans quoting, replaying, remastering, and discussing theories from these games even 20 years later. Some set the tone and direction for the modern development of Star Wars lore, while others shaped the way legends developed. With no further ado, let's get into the games that made many of us the fans we are today.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Like in any extremely popular franchise, many of the games that came out left a little to be desired. The turn of the millennium brought us Star Wars Force Commander, a 3D RTS game released for Windows computers. The plot followed an original story that took place between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. Our protagonist, a young officer in the Imperial Navy, started off as a loyal Imperial soldier, but that loyalty was challenged when he and his brother discovered the Empire was responsible for their father's death, at which point they defected and joined the rebellion. Players guided the protagonist through multiple well-known battles, fighting the Battle of Hoth as an Imperial and the battles of Endor and Coruscant as a rebel commander. Gameplay-wise, players got a bird's-eye view of a 3D map where they could place and command units on the battlefield. Various cutscenes were interspersed between battles that progressed the game's plot. One good thing about it was that it supported up to 6 players in multiplayer, either via LAN or TCP/IP. In theory, the game had a lot of potential and an interesting plot, but the game's interface made it a truly unfulfilling experience. It was too small, unintuitive, and difficult to do anything, while the units themselves felt static and unbalanced. A good effort, but for what it achieved, we'll have to give it a 5 out of 10. Unreached potential. That same year, we got Star Wars Demolition, a vehicular combat game developed by Luxofilm for consoles. Inspired by other popular titles of the era, this game was little more than a vehicle-on-vehicle combat game that replaced normal vehicles with iconic Star Wars ones. In this game, the Empire outlawed pod racing, and Jabba the Hutt created an even more dangerous vehicle sport for his entertainment, bringing together pilots from all across the galaxy to fight to the death atop their vehicles of choice. To actually play the game, players had to choose an arena from the menu, then pick their player character and vehicle combo, all of which had different stats. With selections made, players were transported to a 3D land of pixels where they fought to the death, upgrading their gear and collecting power-ups along the way. On the surface, gameplay was fun, vehicles controlled well, the simple mechanics were quite fun, and many environment details made the arenas feel alive. However, the game also contained several serious bugs, like clipping and falling through the floor. For that, we'll give it a 6 out of 10, destroyed by the Sarlacc pit. 2000 also brought us another game from Lucas Learning similar to those we covered in our last video. Star Wars Math, Jabba's Game Galaxy, was a computer game for children 6 and up that focused on improving math skills through a series of minigames played against Jabba the Hutt and other Tatooine characters from Episode 1. As with the other edutainment games from Lucas Learning, we won't be too harsh on the game. It's a cute game for what it was supposed to do, and it delivered fairly well. 5 out of 10. Get da whoopee whoopee. In 2002, Star Wars Bounty Hunter released for the PS2 and GameCube. This was an action-adventure game that served as a prequel to Episode 2, continuing the story of the Jango Fett Open Seasons comic. The game was set 10 years before Episode 2 and explored several movie-related questions, such as how Jango Fett became the template for the clone army. Players controlled Jango on his quest to dismantle the Bandogora crime syndicate, a bounty set by Darth Tyrannus to test prospective templates. Gameplay-wise, it was pretty straightforward. Players controlled Jango in a third-person perspective, using his jetpack, wide arsenal of weapons, and acrobatic skills to progress through the game and kill enemies. Bounties could be captured dead or alive, then turned in for coins to unlock concept art. At the end of each level, players unlocked pages of the open season's comics. When it was released, the game received mixed reviews, and we can see why. The story and level design were quite good, as was the overall combat system, but combat got repetitive fast, and the camera clipping issues made it fairly unpleasant. Overall, we'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. All the ingredients, no salad. We got another maths game in 2008 when Leapfrog Enterprises released Star Wars The Clone Wars for the Leapfrog Digi console. The plot of the game followed Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi on their path through a new separatist factory that was producing the Ultra Droidekas. Children aged 6 to 9 had to guide the Jedi through the game's 4 worlds, each of which had 4 levels and 1 final boss fight. To progress through the levels, children had to solve math problems and unlock checkpoints using the skills they were learning in school. On a more fun note, players could still do things like run, jump, and use their lightsabers in the Force to advance. Yet again, we have to be lenient with the score. It was a good game with a good purpose, and there was an attempt at a story. We'll give it a 6 out of 10. We wish we had this in school. In 2006, Ubisoft of all people developed Star Wars Lethal Alliance, an action-adventure game for the PSP and Nintendo DS. Taking place between episodes 3 and 4, the game followed Rihanna Saren, a Twi'lek mercenary who had been captured while fighting the Empire. After she was freed by Karl Katan, Rihanna joined the Alliance and undertook many missions for them, during which she ended up captured again many times. On a mission to destroy a shipment of Mercanite, she tracked her former captor to Tatooine, but was captured yet again and taken to Despari, the planet where the Death Star was being constructed. After managing to escape, she informed the Alliance of the Death Star's existence. Gameplay-wise, the game focused on acrobatics and platforming, with the use of a companion droid to enhance Rihanna's movements, absorb fire, and even work as a mount. Each handheld version added a unique feature. The PSP version allowed for stealth attacks, while DS players got an exclusive weapon. Both versions also included multiplayer battles, but that wasn't enough to save a mediocre game. While it wasn't entirely bad, there's very little good about this game, especially compared to others of its era. For that, it gets a meager 5.5 out of 10. Rihanna got captured again. With the release of the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance, the early 2000s saw many movie franchises receiving game adaptations for these popular handhelds, and Star Wars was no different. 2000 brought us Star Wars Episode 1, Obi-Wan's Adventures, an action game released for the Game Boy Color. Controlling Obi-Wan, players had to navigate through various levels, defeating Trade Federation enemies, opening doors, all to progress through the plot of Episode 1. Just like the movie, the game ended with a climactic battle against Darth Maul, after which players were promoted to a Jedi Knight. Gameplay was much simpler than most console games at the time due to the Game Boy Color's limited buttons. Players had lightsabers and blasters at their disposal to cover for short and long-range combat, as well as some force powers which required charging by collecting force pallets. For the handheld it was released on, we'd say the game did a phenomenal job. Combat wasn't as tedious as it could have been, and the level design and palette choices were extremely pleasant to play through. Above all else though, what makes this game a nostalgic masterpiece for us has to be the iconic 8-bit sound of the Game Boy Color. With classic soundtracks and remixes rendered in the classic style, just listening to this game brings untold joy. 7 out of 10, listening to the OST on repeat. Starting in 2002, THQ published 3 games for the Game Boy Advanced. A few months before Episode 2 was released, Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones was announced. This side-scrolling platform game was met with almost universal hate. In total, the game contained 11 levels across which players controlled Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Mace Windu to relive many of the important events of Episode 2. Even though the game's soundtrack included the Imperial March, for some reason, It did a fairly good job of summarizing the points of the movie in single-frame dialogues, but the game's controls were so poor it was despised by all who tried to play it. Only a small portion of the screen was visible at any given time, which meant that players were constantly ambushed by enemies. Enemies themselves were a nightmare to hit due to the controls, and dodging was near impossible. Not only did this game use inverted controls, but it also required players to hold down the A button and use the arrow buttons to direct and unleash a standard attack. The end result was an extremely dissatisfying slog, and for that, it earns a scornful 3.5 out of 10, jumped off the roof in frustration. THQ's second game was Star Wars: The New Droid Army, an action game featuring Anakin Skywalker that took place shortly after the events of Episode 2. Interestingly enough, the plot featured an alternate ending for the entire trilogy. Anakin, initially investigating rumors of a new separatist droid factory, set off on a series of adventures directed by the Jedi Council. This culminated in his mission to Medalorn, where Anakin successfully destroyed the Cortosis droid factory, captured the leader of the Techno Union, and defeated Count Dooku on the way out. Gameplay followed an isometric look. Players could use a lightsaber to attack and reflect, as well as 5 force powers which could be unlocked after each area. Overall though, the controls were limited and the level design could get extremely tedious and unnecessarily frustrating, like the murder lava pits found inside the droid factory, for some reason. We'll give this game a 6 out of 10. Dove into lava again. Their third game was published in 2003. Star Wars: Flight of the Falcon was a 3D aerial FPS game set during the original trilogy. Players controlled Han Solo and Chewbacca in their fight against the Empire. Piloting many different ships, including the Millennium Falcon, players had to complete 14 missions to help the Rebel Alliance. The game's missions followed events from the original films, but several new battles were included. Weirdly enough, the game didn't come with a save option. Instead, players were rewarded as they progressed with passwords that would reload the game at that checkpoint if the game was turned off. Although the game's sound design and music were excellent, everything else about it was not. The GBA's engine struggled to keep up with the high 3D demands and level design, which made movement and animation extremely chuggy and unpleasant. Overall, we'll give it a 4 out of 10. Better write that password down. Following the success of the first Rogue Squadron game, the early millennium brought us 2 more in the forms of Rogue Squadron 2, Rogue Leader, and Rogue Squadron 3, Rebel Strike, in 2001 and 2003 respectively. Rogue Leader, a flight action game set during the original trilogy, started with the Battle of Yavin and included multiple cutscenes from the movies. Players led Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles on a series of missions across the galaxy following the events of the films. Missions took players everywhere, from Hoth, where they defended Echo Base to assist the evacuation, to the Maw, where they freed a rebel prisoner before learning of and assisting in the destruction of the second Death Star above Endor. In total, the game had 10 levels, each with objectives like search and rescue or protection that players had to complete to move to the next level. Enemy aircraft were mostly Imperial ships, though at times, the players had to contend with ground troops as well. All 7 vehicles the player flew had unique stats and artillery, and while every level required a specific vehicle for story purposes, it could be replayed with any vehicle afterwards. After each level, players earned medals based on performance, which unlocked hidden content. The final reward for completing everything on Gold was Ace Mode, the game's hardest difficulty. Overall, the game was as much of a success as its predecessor, with such fun and engaging combat that people justified buying an entirely new console just for it. We have to give it a venerable 8.5 out of 10, Star Wars piloting at its finest. 2 years later, Rebel Strike was released to round up the saga. Much like Rebel Leader, players controlled Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles on various missions against the Empire. Each of them had their separate stories, which split the game in 2. With Luke, players brought the Rebel Alliance from the Yavin 4 base to Echo Base, with side plots involving defecting Imperials. Along the way, one of Rogue Squadron's own, Sarlacc, also turned traitor. Wedge's portion of the story began after the loss of the Battle of Hoth. On a later mission, Sarlacc led them into an ambush above Geonosis, resulting in them crash landing on the planet. Wedge survived the crash, escaping capture and uncovering a plot to destroy part of the Alliance fleet. The game ended with a Rebel victory at Endor. Like its predecessors, Rebel Strike focused on aerial combat, but it also introduced many on-foot missions. Also included were 2 multiplayer modes. Co-op allowed players to replay missions from Rogue Leader and Split Screen, and Versus offered multiple combat missions, like Dogfight and Survival. Overall, its aerial combat was thrilling and exciting, and its on-foot missions were an absolute slog. For that sin, we have to give it a lower rating than Rebel Leader, coming in at 7.5 out of 10. Defectors gonna defect. In the early 2000s, we got another installment in the Star Wars RTS video game catalog with Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, which came out in 2001, and its expansion, Clone Campaigns, which released the following year. Developed by Ensemble Studios on the same engine that ran our beloved Age of Empires 2, the game followed a very similar logic. Players started with a command center, a scout, and 3 workers, much like they would in Age of Empires. From there on, they had to gather resources and use them to build structures and expand their forces, and eventually win by destroying the enemy, preserving all the holocrons in their temple for 200 days, or building a monument and defending it for 300 days. In total, there was 1 tutorial and 5 campaigns, each involving a different faction, from securing Naboo as the Trade Federation to liberating Kashyyyk as the Wookiees. Other factions were the Gungans, Galactic Empire, and Rebel Alliance. The expansion pack was released 2 days before Episode 2 hit the theaters and introduced 2 new playable factions and campaigns, the Confederacy of Independent Systems and the Galactic Republic. Additional units, supports for power supplies, and more were also added to expand gameplay. As we've said already, this was basically an Age of Empires 2 Star Wars edition, and anyone who's played the original version knows this game was addictive. It did nothing to really innovate other than replacing historical units and factions with Star Wars equivalents, but honestly, it didn't need to do much more to be an amazing game. We'll give the 2 together a collective 8.5 out of 10. Protect those holocrons. Several years later, in 2006, Star Wars Empire at War was developed for the PC by Polygraph Games. The game was set between episodes 3 and 4 and focused on the burgeoning galactic civil war and the construction of the Death Star. The game featured 2 campaigns, a Rebel and an Imperial one, both of which targeted key story points. For the Rebels, that involved attacking Kuat, securing X-Wings, liberating Kashyyyk, and ultimately the Battle of Yavin. For the Imperials, players guided Darth Vader on his search for the Alliance, helping the Empire develop the Death Star plans, then tracking the traitor down when they were stolen. Gameplay-wise, the game offered 3 modes: story campaigns, galactic conquest, and skirmish, with battles that took place either in space or on the ground. Our favourite was Galactic Conquest, a sandbox mode where players had to hit certain objectives to win, such as killing the enemy leader or destroying the Death Star. Skirmishes were the classic RTS mode where players started with a small base, gathered materials, and upgraded their units. Later that year, an expansion was released. Empire at War, Forces of Corruption, introduced a new faction, the Zan Consortium, an organized crime syndicate. The campaign story followed Tiber Zan, a member of the syndicate, from the Battle of Yavin all the way up to the destruction of the second Death Star. Along the way, Tiber got into many tough spots like clashing with Grand Admiral Thrawn and fighting Darth Vader. After the Battle of Endor, he stole a Sith artifact that the Consortium used to locate an ancient Sith army frozen in carbonite for 4,000 years. The campaign ended with them discovering Revan's infinite army from KOTOR, which was certainly an interesting choice. The expansion also added new units for all factions, new vehicle-only zones, as well as a dozen planets to Galactic Conquest and skirmish modes. Overall, Empire at War gave players an excellent Star Wars feeling adventure with good strategy options, decent unit management, and immersive play. On the other hand, the computer's AI was sometimes too passive or expected perfect playing, which contributed to the game's initial steep learning curve. Still, they were incredibly fun and well thought out for their time, so we'll give this duo an 8 out of 10. Somehow, Revan's army returned. As we said in our last video on this series, Star Wars inevitably inspired an entire sleuth of games around vehicles, and the 2000s were no exception. Star Wars Racer Arcade was Sega's new addition to the racing arcade game scene. Released in 2000, after the release of The Phantom Menace, players chose from 4 different pod racing tracks, with difficulties ranging from easy to expert. What was particularly cool about the game were the 2 throttle controls these arcade machines came with, which felt very authentic to the movie. All 4 tracks were distinctly unique, but pod races being mostly indestructible made races feel a little anticlimactic. Overall, it got a 6 out of 10, no explosions included. A more surprising entry was Star Wars Super Bombad Racing, a 2001 racing and vehicular combat game released for console and PC. Players chose from a variety of Episode 1 characters to participate in courses modeled after the film. Each race included 8 contestants, with up to 4 players able to join at the same time. Each course had 3 laps littered with power-ups that gave temporary abilities. A variant mode limited the player count to 2 groups of 2. Almost as an afterthought, an arena mode was added that let players fight in vehicle-on-vehicle combat using the power-ups to gain extra abilities. In total, there were 9 courses and 4 arenas to choose from. Surprisingly, the game was quite fun to play, with entertaining voice lines and taunts thrown in alongside the charming art style. At the same time, however, races moved unnaturally slowly, gameplay got repetitive fast, and the game was so short it could be finished in 3 hours or so. Not the best, especially compared to the others, so we'll give it a 5 out of 10, like riding through caramel. Star Wars Starfighter was a 2001 action game released for the PS2 and Xbox. Players could pick between one of 4 starfighter pilots of the Naboo Spacefighter Corps and work together to defend Naboo from invasion. From defending the Queen during Trade Federation negotiations, to testing new starfighters, teaming up to destroy a Federation droid factory on Eos, and destroying droid starfighters while the Battle of Naboo raged, the players were key members in the success of Naboo's liberation. Gameplay was fairly straightforward. Players piloted various starfighters on 14 missions, which involved objectives such as protecting allied ships and destroying enemies. Missions also included 1 bonus and 1 secret objective, which unlocked other hidden content like extra videos, missions, and fighters. At its core, the game's fighting style was easy to pick up, if repetitive and simplistic. Despite the short campaign, the story was quite interesting, which almost made up for the bad AI. For its time, it was an excellent game, so we'll give it a respectable 7.5 out of 10. Helped Anakin, sorta. The game's sequel, Star Wars Jedi Starfighter, came out 1 year later. Taking place just before the Battle of Geonosis, players followed along as Jedi Master Adi Gallia and Nim, one of the 4 pilots from the previous game, tested out the new Jedi Starfighter against the greedily expanding Trade Federation, which was also seeking a new weapon to use in the coming war. Just like in the first game, players flew a variety of different starfighters, each with pros and cons, to complete missions with bonus and hidden objectives that unlocked additional content. This game has many of the same pros and cons as the original, with the added benefit of cool force powers players could use while flying the Jedi Starfighter. For that small addition, we'll give it a 7.8 out of 10, only slightly better. Later that year, Pandemic Studios developed Star Wars The Clone Wars, a vehicular combat game released for consoles. Set in the prequel era, players controlled famous characters throughout the events of the Clone Wars. Although the game started with the Battle of Geonosis, the main plot point was the discovery of the Force Harvester, a separatist weapon modeled after the Dark Reaper, a Sith superweapon destroyed by Ulic Qel-Droma during the Great Sith Wars. With the help of Qel-Droma's ghost, the heroes ultimately prevented the Sith superweapon from being rebuilt. Gameplay-wise, the game had two modes: third-person Jedi combat starring Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Windu, and vehicular combat featuring most famous Star Wars vehicles. The game also offered multiplayer capabilities, with 4 players able to play via split screen across multiple game modes and levels. Although the game's campaign was fairly short and Jedi fighting segments slow and awkward, it did an amazing job at setting the tone of such a massive scale war. For the fun combat and atmosphere, we'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. The war was always the protagonist. Rainbow Studios released yet another game that same year known as Star Wars Racer Revenge, a simple racing game that succeeded Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. This pod racing game followed the story of Sebulba, who wanted revenge on Anakin Skywalker 8 years after his humiliating defeat on Tatooine. In single-player mode, players selected one of many characters and pod races, each of which had unique stats that affected their performance. 13 levels across multiple planets formed the available tracks, and players could select one of 3 modes. In multiplayer mode, up to 2 players could compete together. Unlike the first game, players could absolutely destroy enemy pod races, and any destroyed pod races didn't respawn during the race. This made vehicular combat significantly more fun, especially when playing with a friend, so we'll forgive its poor AI and lazy level design to give it another 7.5 out of 10. Explosions are so back. Just like the years following the release of the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, released between 1999 and 2005, and later the Clone Wars series, reignited the passion for Star Wars and inspired a new influx of video games, most of which had railroad titles. The first of these came out in 2000 and was released for the PlayStation and Dreamcast. Star Wars Episode 1, Jedi Power Battles, loosely followed the plot of Episode 1, starting players off in negotiations with the Trade Federation, then an escape to Tatooine, a return to Coruscant, and finally, the Battle of Naboo. The game was a combination platformer and beat-em-up action game that expected players to slice through hordes of easy droid enemies and make jumping sequences to clear the level. Players controlled one of the prequel-era Jedi, mainly using their lightsaber and the Force to get through the levels. The game had a total of 10 levels, with additional ones that could be unlocked by completing specific tasks in-game with specific characters. For many, it was a very fun game, especially when played in 2-player co-op mode, with some extremely comedic touches added in to spice things up, like the Yoda noises every time you picked up an item. However, the motion controls could be very finicky, which made turning hard and led to many silly deaths while platforming. Overall, we'll give it a 6 out of 10. Yoda noises intensify. Star Wars Episode 1, Battle for Naboo, came out the same year for the N64 and Windows computers. For many, this arcade-style action game was considered the spiritual successor to Rogue Squadron. The game followed the story of Gavin Sykes, a lieutenant in the Naboo Royal Security Forces that fought against the Trade Federation's occupation of Naboo. The first mission started players off in Theed the day of the invasion, and once they'd escaped the advancing Federation forces, the protagonist established a resistance and worked to fight back against the occupation until the Queen had returned. The game's climax saw players destroying the droid control ship's shield generator, allowing Skywalker to destroy it and free Naboo. Alongside a story that was more than adequate, the gameplay was also just as good. Level designs felt vast and lived in, and the constant radio chatter was surprisingly well voiced over for its time. In total, players had to navigate 15 levels using a variety of land, air, and water vehicles to destroy enemy aircraft and ground forces while completing each level's objectives. Based on their performance during the level, players unlocked additional content like 3 secret bonus levels. All in all, it had a great story and fantastic graphics for its time, with good controls and high replay value. On the other hand, there was a lot of fluctuation in difficulty, with some missions being too easy and some too hard. Many of the objectives felt repetitive, and when you combine it with a short campaign length overall, it detracted somewhat from the overall experience. Still, we'll give this game a solid 7 out of 10, fighting the Trade Federation in style. In 2001, we got Star Wars Obi-Wan, or Star Wars Episode 1 Obi-Wan, an action-adventure game released as an Xbox exclusive. In this game, players guided Obi-Wan through the events of Episode 1 with several changes, such as Obi-Wan being attacked by a criminal syndicate on Coruscant, or Amidala being kidnapped by Tusken Raiders on Tatooine. The gameplay itself introduced some new elements to the system, such as the player's lightsaber being directly controlled by the right Xbox stick. Alongside the lightsaber, players could use the Force, as well as other weapons such as ion grenades and blasters. These mechanics technically worked, but they didn't mesh together to create an exciting game. Enemies seemed to die within 1 or 2 hits, and with how many of them there were, it felt pretty spammy. The camera was also a major enemy of the players, getting stuck repeatedly. At the end of the day though, you were able to kill any person in front of you, regardless of them being an enemy, so we'll give it a 4.5 out of 10. Murdering NPCs is our hobby. These movie remakes culminated in 2005 with Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, another action game released for consoles like the PS2 and Xbox. There was also a handheld console port, but the game was very different, so we'll be focusing on the console version. This game carried the franchise's entire hopes and dreams. Both LucasArts and the Collective invested so much into its development, from the devs receiving footage of the movie as it was being filmed, to the Collective using prequel-era stunt coordinators and Hayden Christensen himself to choreograph the game's lightsaber combat. The plot followed the storyline of Episode 3, starting with Obi-Wan and Anakin rescuing the Supreme Chancellor from Grievous's flagship and ending with the duel on Mustafar. Here, however, the game included an alternate ending, perhaps because it was released 2 weeks before Episode 3 hit the cinemas and contained actual movie footage. In the alternate ending, players played as Darth Vader on Mustafar. The objective was to kill Obi-Wan, then the Emperor, and take his place as the leader of the Empire. Gameplay-wise, the game is still excellent even by today's standards. The game contained 17 levels and about 12 minutes of movie footage as cutscenes. Combat was heavily lightsaber-oriented, with smooth controls, natural-looking movements, and implementation of force powers that could be upgraded using points gathered at the end of each level. After finishing the campaign, players also got access to several bonus levels from other character perspectives, like Yoda in the Jedi Temple and a Magna Guard on Utapau. The game's level design was phenomenal and managed to showcase many areas of the movie beautifully. Overall, we have to give this game a very satisfying 9 out of 10. The alternate ending slaps. Finally, although it wasn't directly a movie tie-in, we have Star Wars The Clone Wars Republic Heroes, developed by Chrome Studios for PC, console, and many handhelds in 2009. The game was set between seasons 1 and 2 of the Clone Wars animated series and featured a wide cast of characters such as Anakin, Aayla Secura, Kit Fisto, Plo Koon, and many of the clone troopers. Players guided characters through seemingly unrelated missions that all came together to become one objective: destroy a separatist superweapon. Gameplay-wise, Republic Heroes was a simple level-based action-adventure game with third-person perspectives. Jedi characters relied on their sabers, the Force, and parkour, while clone characters made the game feel like more of an FPS. Despite an interesting sounding premise, the game was hated upon release due to its mediocre story, the extremely dull gameplay, and, above all else, the fixed camera angle that made playing hell. We love the Clone Wars, but even we give this a 4 out of 10. Cannot see Sith. In 2003, we got the first ever Star Wars MMORPG in the form of Star Wars Galaxies, a game still quite beloved by the community, enough so that Star Wars Galaxies Legends have created emulators to allow people to continue playing it even after its shut down in 2011. The best thing that could be said about Galaxies was that it offered the truest Star Wars roleplay experience any game has ever offered. The starting playable species included the typical humanoids, like Twi'leks and Zabraks, but most of the races were uniquely alien, like Mon Cala and Trandoshans, a choice that wouldn't be repeated in other MMOs. In the base game, Star Wars Galaxies, An Empire Divided, players were allowed to live their Star Wars fantasies out across 10 planets and 12 space zones. Set after the destruction of the Death Star, but before the Empire Strikes Back, players got to visit many famous locations and interact with well-known characters. The game's main appeal was its world building. Characters chose professions which all contained specializations. They could erect private or public buildings that, when grouped, would form cities players could elect mayors in. The combat system was also fairly basic, FPS style with only 3 bars, but it was engaging. There's a reason the game was so beloved. It was one of the best, if not the best, Star Wars sandbox games to ever be released, and for that, we'll give it an 8 out of 10. We miss visiting our friends' ships. The first expansion, Jump to Lightspeed, came out in 2004 and introduced space-based content to the game. 12 space sectors were added, some used for missions and others for pure PvP. 2 additional races were also added in the form of the Celeste and Ithorians. 3 new piloting professions were introduced into the game, which allowed for spacecraft customizations, whether that was the ship's tactics, appearance, or skills. Overall, the expansion was very well received, even being nominated for several awards. 1 year later, Rage of the Wookiees added a new planet and space sector in the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk. This new planet differed from the 10 base game worlds in that, instead of being an open sandbox area, it was divided into a small central hub with branching out instanced dungeon areas. Another addition in this expansion was the ability to customize your characters with cybernetics, as well as new animal mounts and starships. 19 days later, the total experience was released, a box set of the base game and 2 expansions. Until this point, subscribing allowed players to play all released content, but with the box set, they could purchase them all in one go. The set was released following the theater release of Revenge of the Sith, and players who purchased it received a commemorative bark speeder to use as an in-game mount. The game's final expansion came out in November of the same year. Trials of Obi-Wan further played into the Revenge of the Sith hype by adding Mustafar to the game. The expansion added more than 50 new quests, from rescue missions to exploring crashed ships. Another fan-favorite addition was the return of HK-47, as well as the ability to unlock a fiery red lightsaber crystal that created a lava-like blade once players completed a questline to help Obi-Wan's Force Ghost correct an imbalance in the Force. Although no new space sectors were added, this was a considerable amount of content for the game, and players received valuable rewards for completing content. For that, we'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. I'm back, meatbags. In this era, we were also lucky enough to get some of the best Star Wars FPS games of all time. In 2005, we got Republic Commando, one of the more fondly remembered stories. Set during the Clone Wars era, the game followed Delta Squad, a special ops unit of clone commandos. After watching Boss, Scorch, Fixer, and Sev pass through their early training, they were sent across various harsh objectives across the galaxy, like destroying droid factories and taking down Trandoshan and Federation forces. Later in the war, Delta Squad was dispatched to Kashyyyk, where they fought against Separatist invasion of the planet during the Battle of Kashyyyk, ultimately succeeding, but losing Sev in the process. Like many other FPSs, players viewed the game through the character's tactical visor. Playing as the squad leader, players controlled the other 3 NPC squad members via the order system visible on their HUD. Together with the NPCs, players completed objectives throughout the levels, assigning tasks and directing members wherever they had to go. In single player mode, instead of dying, characters were incapacitated when their health bars ran out, allowing other characters to revive them. To get a true game over, all 4 members of the squad had to go down. The player's main weapon, the DC-17, could be configured into various weapon modes, like a sniper or assault rifle, but players could also pick up new weapons. Multiplayer was also available with varying objectives such as capture the flag, team deathmatch, and so on. What stood out most about Republic Commando was the story and the extremely interesting personalities of Delta Squad. In that regard, the game was extremely solid. However, for a tactical FPS game, the game didn't really pose much of a challenge. Although each character had a specialization, other characters did their job equally well and quickly, and most of the mission objectives boiled down to shooting rather than strategy. Still, it was a well-received game most people still remember fondly, so we'll give it an 8 out of 10. Didn't know Trend Oceans could fly. But of course, when it comes to Star Wars FPS, none are as renowned as the Battlefront series. Starting in 2004 with Star Wars Battlefront, Pandemic Studios launched perhaps one of the most recognizable game sagas. In total, there were 4 main factions in the game: the Republic, the CIS, the Empire, and the Rebel Alliance. Each faction contained 5 different character classes: sniper, pilot, heavy weapons, and infantry, and one 5th class that was unique to each faction. Finally, each faction had an NPC hero that would participate in the battle alongside the players. The main gameplay mode was Conquest. Each level contained a number of command posts divided between the factions, which had limited reinforcements. To win, a faction either had to eliminate all the enemy forces or capture and hold all the command posts for 20 seconds. Some maps even had native armies that could be hostile to none, one, or both. Single-player mode offered players a choice of campaign, galactic conquest, which involved fighting for and controlling planets across the galaxy, and instant action, where players selected a map and battled it out. Overall, it was an excellent game with multiple modes and objective types to offer challenges to players and extensive, fun online multiplayer modes. We have to give it a solid 8 out of 10. Secret bases were OP. Star Wars Battlefront 2 released the following year. This sequel was more narrative-driven than the original. The game told the story of a veteran Imperial stormtrooper who had lived through the Clone Wars as part of the 501st. Players followed along as the Clone Wars raged, culminating in Order 66 and the slaughter at the Jedi Temple, before transitioning to the Empire, where the protagonist lived through the capture of the Tantive 4 and the Battle of Hoth. Unlike Battlefront's 4-faction system, Battlefront 2 focused on a single campaign, Rise of the Empire. Much like its predecessor, the game offered campaign, galactic conquest, and instant action modes, and 4 additional modes to clear a map. All in all, the game was a resounding upgrade on its predecessor, with a more engaging story, better enemy AI, and an overall more polished look, and for that, we give it a high 8.5 out of 10. Our hearts lie with the veteran. In 2007, the saga swapped over to the handheld consoles with Star Wars Battlefront Renegade Squadron, a PSP exclusive. The game followed the story of Renegade Squadron, one of the Rebel Alliance squads during the Galactic Civil War, as told by Col Serra, the unit's leader. Formed right before the Battle of Yavin, Renegade Squadron completed many covert ops during the war for the Alliance, working in secrecy alongside major events at Yavin, Hoth, and Endor. Gameplay continued to mirror that of previous installments, with on-foot and space battles designed around capturing and holding command posts before their reinforcements ran out. One thing Renegade Squadron added was character customization, including weapons and equipment. Much like in other Battlefront titles, Renegade Squadron offered 3 single-player modes: Campaign, Galactic Conquest, and Instant Action, and an online multiplayer mode with up to 8 players that were limited to either Conquest or CTF. Compared to previous installments, it was a better PSP game, but a worse Battlefront overall. The added customization options and overall story were excellent, but with clumsy and sluggish controls, we can only give the game a 7 out of 10. Progress in the wrong direction. The final installment in this saga came out in 2009 with Star Wars Battlefront Elite Squadron, which was released for the PSP and Nintendo DS. Fans might be familiar with the game's protagonist, X2, an elite clone trooper that was the Force-sensitive clone of a Jedi Master. Players followed X2's story alongside that of his brothers, X1, beginning at the tail end of the Clone Wars all the way up to the slaughter of Order 66. After killing their Jedi General, X2 was horrified and while his brother joined the Empire willingly, he fled to Dantooine to train as a Jedi before joining the Rebel Alliance as a member of Grey Squadron. After the Battle of Endor, X2 joined the New Jedi Order, training to prepare for the final confrontation with X1, whom he ultimately killed. Elite Squadron included both space and ground combat, but also on-foot missions like storming capital ships. What was groundbreaking about this game was that, rather than the battles being one large map, they were broken down into many interconnected segments players transitioned between at will. This could mean that, within the same battle, players could fight on foot, in space, or on the ground, and choose where to go to do the most damage, like flying from the ground into space to storm a capital ship. Depending on their choices, the battle's outcome was decided. Despite mixed reviews, we personally think this was an amazing touch, so we'll give the game a solid 7.5 out of 10. The lore is crying. "2005 saw the beginning of one of the most beloved Star Wars video game series of all time, the LEGO Star Wars series released by Traveller's Tales. The saga begins with LEGO Star Wars, the video game, and many more came after its roaring success. The game's plot was, in essence, a fun retelling of episodes 1, 2, and 3, with a bonus level at the end showing the start of episode 4 from Darth Vader's perspective. The gameplay was far more interesting. To progress through the levels and story, players had to use a variety of characters, swapping control from one to the other to utilize their unique skills to solve puzzles. As you can expect, the game was extremely family-oriented, allowing local multiplayer so families could play together. This also explains why the gameplay was so forgiving. The game had no game over mode. Instead, if players lost all their hearts, they immediately respawned, only losing some LEGO studs, the in-game currency. The LEGO on LEGO violence was also delightfully fun, whether the players were attacking or just watching the NPCs whack at each other. Where this game really shined though was the humor. Even with unvoiced characters, the animation, design, and expressiveness made this game extremely entertaining to play through even 20 years later. Overall, this game was an absolute delight, and it's no wonder it spawned an entire game series. We have to give it a stellar 8 out of 10. LEGO Yoda, go brr. The following year, we got a sequel in LEGO Star Wars 2, the original trilogy. Like the first game, it was a part retelling, part parody of episodes 4, 5, and 6. The gameplay was pretty much the same as the first game, with some features improved and new ones introduced. Building tools to progress the level was one of the new features, as were multi-levered doors, melee attacks for blasters, the ability to dodge, and movable objects. The game also went back to improve older features such as the vehicle controls and speeder missions, which made many players rage in the original LEGO Star Wars. For maintaining the original's quality and improving it, we'll give this game an 8 out of 10. LEGO Leia literally slaps. You'll notice that, despite very positive feedback, neither game got a stellar score. That's because they were both overshadowed by the third installment of this series, LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga, which was released in 2007. This third installment in the series basically combined the first two into a single game. Players could play through the storylines of episodes 1 through 6, reusing the levels from the original 2 games with 2 extra levels that had previously been scrapped. The levels from the first game were upgraded to include the quality of life upgrades the second game introduced, and additional bounty hunter levels were added to make for a more complete experience. The final major upgrade was the inclusion of a 2-player battle arena mode. Overall, this third game basically replaced the first 2, adding some extra content and quality of life updates, and for those small changes, we'll give it an 8.5 out of 10. Pod racing still sucks. The last game in this series that was released during this time period came out in 2011. LEGO Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars, started players off in the Geonosian arena of Episode 2, but the rest of the game took place during the Clone Wars animated film and the animated show's first 2 seasons. When it came to gameplay, however, LEGO Star Wars 3 began to unravel. On the surface, the game's controls resembled its predecessors, which were occasionally janky, but overall didn't detract from the game's easygoing fun. LEGO Star Wars 3, however, completely destroyed that sense of fun by requiring players to constantly swap between characters to perform single actions to progress the story. Even on the very first level, players had to swap to Padme to press one key, swap to a Jedi to press another, then back to another character, each change accompanied by a camera swap. It quickly sucked the fun out of the game, and for that, we'll give it a 5 out of 10, saved by the cutscenes. In our opinion, the best Star Wars games have always been the action-adventure games, and this decade brought us 3 shining examples of storytelling, gameplay, and entertainment that is still talked about to this day. In our previous video, we talked about the beginning of the Jedi Knight saga, which continued in 2002 and 2003 with Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and Star Wars Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, 2 of the most beloved games from the early millennium. Jedi Outcast was set in 12 ABY, about 2 years after Mysteries of the Sith. Players continued the story of Kyle Katarn, whom we last left off cut off from the Force after almost falling, now working as a mercenary for the New Republic. After his love interest, Jan Ors, was killed in the starting mission by a dark Jedi known as Desan, Kyle set off for the Valley of the Jedi to regain his connection to the Force and his lightsaber so he could track down Desan and take him out. Desan, however, had faked Jan's death so he could follow Katarn to the Valley of the Jedi and sap its energy to power his army of reborn soldiers. After saving Jan, the two traveled to Yavin 4 to defend the Jedi Academy from Desan's assaults, and Kyle was forced to kill him when the Dark Jedi refused to surrender. Although the game allowed players to use a variety of weapons, its main focus was lightsaber combat. Players could choose from one of 3 styles and utilize a series of combos to wipe out enemies. Force powers were also implemented with a force meter that refilled over time, much like in modern games. Alongside the single-player mode, a multiplayer mode divided players into light and darksiders, which fought one another in team battles. Both sides had access to the neutral powers and their respective unique light and dark side powers. In the single-player mode, players were also no longer restricted to only using one or the other. Like we said, this has to be one of the best Star Wars games of its time. The story was unbelievably fun and engaging, and the combat system worked smoothly and very enjoyably. Looking back, we have to give this game a 9 out of 10. Katarn still sasses like a queen. Then there was Jedi Academy, one of our own personal childhood favorites. Set 2 years after Jedi Outcast, the plot now followed Jaden Korr, a talented Jedi Padawan at the new Jedi Academy. Alongside Rosh Pennon, fellow Padawan, the two studied under Kyle Katarn and embarked on various missions across the galaxy. The villains of the game were the Disciples of Ragnos, a Sith cult who Luke believed were siphoning Force energy. During their investigation, Rosh fell to the dark side and joined the Disciples, and Jaden was promoted to Jedi Knight for his performance. Jaden confronted Rosh later, and players got to choose between the light side choice of redeeming him or the dark side option of killing him. From there, Jaden traveled to Korriban to the tomb of Marka Ragnos, whom the cult wanted to resurrect, and either destroyed the scepter and defeated Ragnos, or took its power for themselves and fled depending on alignment. Gameplay-wise, Jedi Academy ran on the same engine as Jedi Outcast and used a very similar combat system. The game added more customization, like picking a lightsaber color and fighting style, including picking a single saber, dual wield, or saber staff. Force powers upgraded throughout the game and felt very rewarding as you progressed. That one mandatory speeder level aside, Jedi Academy was extremely fun for its time, with a story that felt vibrant, captivating, and with high stakes. The different outcomes for a light and dark side choice were particularly fascinating at the time, as players could straight up become the villain, which we appreciate. Overall, this game was the pinnacle of the saga and earned a very solid 9.5 out of 10. That one sand level still gives us nightmares. Then, however, we come to one of the biggest powerhouses in Star Wars gaming. Star Wars The Force Unleashed was released in 2008, and it was perhaps one of the most influential games in Star Wars video game history. The story followed Galen Marek, codenamed Starkiller, the son of a surviving Jedi who had been taken by Darth Vader and trained to be his secret Sith apprentice. Vader had hoped to train Starkiller so that, together, they could defeat the Emperor and take his place, but when the Emperor learned of Starkiller's existence prematurely, Vader faked Starkiller's death to prove his loyalty. From there, Starkiller was sent to foster rebellion among the Emperor's enemies. Starkiller succeeded in bringing the leaders of the Rebel Alliance together to officially sign the Declaration, which is when Vader attacked and arrested them, once more trying to kill Starkiller. After traveling to the Death Star to rescue the Alliance leaders, players got to choose between two endings. Starkiller could either embrace the light side, showing mercy and focusing on rescuing the Jedi and Senators, or he could embrace the dark side and kill Vader. In the first ending, Starkiller rescues the Senators at the expense of his life, and in the second, he kills Vader and takes his place as the Emperor's apprentice, though only until he, too, would be replaced. Gameplay-wise, The Force Unleashed played like most modern Star Wars games. Players controlled Starkiller and had a wide variety of Force powers and lightsaber skills to destroy enemies with. Developers went out of their way to make it accessible to all, rewarding more skilled gamers for more difficult playstyles while allowing less confident gamers to get by with straightforward strategies. There was a wide variety of enemies who could even learn from the character's actions, so spamming the same attack resulted in increasingly less damage. In many ways, there isn't a lot to criticize this game for. The story was engaging, the gameplay was smooth, entertaining, and made everyone feel extremely badass, and it offered something no matter how good of a gamer you were. Without this game, it's hard to imagine what modern Star Wars games would look like. That said, if you're a long-time viewer, you'll know we have some personal beef with the artistic liberties this game takes, particularly when it comes to how OP Starkiller is shown to be. Legends lore can often contradict itself, which creates problems when trying to agree on what's reasonable, and The Force Unleashed is one of the biggest culprits. Still, we can't really hold that against the game, so we have to give it a very high 9 out of 10. Star Destroyers fear him. If you've watched this far, you've probably been screaming, but what about KOTOR? We hear you. No video on this era of Star Wars would ever be complete without mentioning the two, in our opinion, best Star Wars games to have ever been released. Regular viewers of our channel will recall our annual KOTOR 2 videos and know that, out of all the games to have ever been released, we return to these two over and over again, whether we're talking about Force Philosophy or the Mandalorian Wars. Knights of the Old Republic released in 2003 and took the fandom by storm. During the game, the player character began as a newly discovered Force sensitive that received Jedi training. When it was discovered they and Bastila Shan were connected through visions, the player set off on an adventure to collect the star map fragments so they could find the source of Darth Malak's power and end the war. The player traveled all over the galaxy, collecting fragments on different worlds, acquiring new companions, and making decisions that affected their alignment. As the game progressed, however, the most famous plot twist in all of Star Wars gaming was revealed. The player was actually an amnesiac Darth Revan all along, one of the orchestrators of the Jedi Civil War who had been incapacitated and brainwashed. For the remainder of the game, the player continued on their quest to destroy the Starforge and end the war, with different outcomes depending on their choices. Gameplay-wise, KOTOR has some janky controls and a very unpleasant turn-based system, but it made up for that with the customizability of your characters. It used a Pathfinder system to attribute stats and skills which some players liked and some hated. Where KOTOR truly stood out was its outstanding storyline. From the twist reveal to the companions and plot to the sheer variety of worlds players visited, KOTOR had one of the best stories you'll ever find. For that, we have to give it a 9.99 out of 10. Vrook Lamar can suck it. The only reason we didn't give KOTOR the rare Geetsly's 10 out of 10 is because of its sequel, KOTOR 2, which released an unbelievable year and a half later. KOTOR 2, The Sith Lords, took place about 5 years after the ending of the first game. This time round, players played as the Exile, a Jedi Knight who had been cut off from the Force following the Mandalorian Wars. In the current setting, the Jedi had been nearly wiped out, with more being assassinated. Most Jedi had gone into hiding. After encountering their first companions in the form of Kreia and T3M4, the Exile was sent on a mission to find members of the Jedi Council in hiding so the Order could regroup and face the threat together. It was slowly revealed that the Sith were the masterminds behind the war, and now the Sith Triumvirate was slowly destroying what was left of the Order. One way or another, the Jedi Council were killed, and the Exiles set off with their remaining companions to take down the Sith Triumvirate and heal the wound above Malachor 5. This brief summary doesn't do the game's plot even remotely close to justice, of course. KOTOR 2 was packed full of philosophy, complicated characters, and conflicting points of view that conveyed a deep sense of nuance. The game's companions and enemies represented a diverse roster of principles and ideologies that were so profound, the fandom still debates them heatedly 20 years later. For the sheer amount of lore and nuance this game packed, for the plot, the epic journey, and the morals it conveyed, we have to give it the highest 10 out of 10. The best Star Wars game of all time. On that impossibly high note, we'll wrap up this trip down the nostalgia lane. We hope you enjoyed this peek into the best era of Star Wars gaming history. To many fans, including us, these were the best Star Wars has ever got, and when we look at most modern games, we can't help but feel nostalgic for the simple perfection the 2000s brought. In our last video in this series, we'll be talking about the modern era of Star Wars games with its extreme highs and lows. Until then, let us know which was your favorite game of this era and which do you still replay regularly. Let us know all that and more in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.